Back in 1974, you'd make about $14,000 a year. Your average house cost less than $50,000 per year. Gasoline was 53 cents per gallon for your new car that cost you $3,500, or you got one of these for about the same kind of money. And these were a lot more fun and used a bit less gas. But we're not talking about 1974. We're talking decades later. And we're going to talk about this particular R90S, the smoke gray one in the middle. These weren't as popular as the Daytona orange R90S models, but it's the same machine. This one only shows 7 miles on the odometer, though the bike's got over 50,000 on it. And it's been sitting since March of 1990. That's a long time for one of these fine old machines. Of course, this one's got the gold pinstripes. You know, it's not as flashy as that orange color scheme of the Daytona orange, but this one's been sitting around. It's got a little bit of rust. Of course, we have the Delorto Carbs. That's what gave it the extra horsepower. Dried out Magura hand grips. Should look more like that. A little bit of rusty hardware here and there. But overall, the bike's not in bad condition. But we don't know if it runs. And it ran when the owner parked it. But it's been sitting for a long time. Look how much the paint's worn through from the seat chafing on that tank over 50,000 miles. So when you get a project like this, you got to check some things. I mean, the bike doesn't run, and it hasn't run in a long time. So you got to get in. You're going to pull the transmission, make sure the splines aren't stripped, because there's no sense going through the effort of trying to make it run if the splines are stripped. And when we get into these models in particular, I'll point something out here. These bikes have what used to be BMW's goofiest brake system. The hand lever operates a cable which runs underneath the fuel tank to this brake master cylinder, which then pushes fluid down to the front calipers at the front wheel. Yeah, cable operated hydraulic brake. The rear was lucky. The rear is just a drum brake operated normally with a brake arm, a brake rod. No, it doesn't go to the hydraulic reservoir. It goes to the pedal. Normal pedal, rod, arm, shoes. So you get into the carbs here. These are Delorto carbs. There's a lot of pieces to these Delorto carbs, and they're pretty expensive to rebuild. You can get into $500, $600, $700 worth of parts pretty easily. So you don't want to do that on a machine that's been sitting around forever. We're just going to go through and clean things. I want to see if this machine runs before you go too much farther. Transmission's out, of course. You need to check the splines. You wouldn't want to have this running and find out the splines are junk. So you disconnect, you pull the transmission. Not too bad looking in there considering the age. The splines are in good condition. Again, we're just trying to get this running and see what kind of a project we have ahead of us. Clean things up. These were nice. That was the year they still had the kickstart. They did away with that the next year. You had to rely on the electric foot. And if the electric foot failed you, you were pushing. There's our clutch assembly. Opted not to disturb it. Reassemble the transmission to the engine and put things back together so we can evaluate this machine. Cleaned up the battery tray. A little bit of paint goes a long ways. Adjusted the valves after retorquing the heads. Swing arm and drive shaft back in place. Starting to look like a motorcycle again. Awaiting installation of the cleaned Delorto carbs. New battery installed. Let's see what we get. Hasn't been on the road since 1990.
I think those on the road.
Let's see what she's got. Tweaking to do.
Single throttle body, carbs,
And ride it. And ride it I did, but it was a very short ride. I only put about 1.3 miles on this machine. It developed a knock. And bringing it back to the shop, it definitely had a knock. And with consultation with a friend of mine who was quite familiar with these from days of old, he said, hey, I bet the flywheel bolts sheared off of that a long time ago and the crank is floating back and forth. And I went, oh no. BMW used 10 millimeter bolts to hold the flywheel on, and these were sufficient for all of the models right up until the R90. When they reached the R90 models, they were reaching the limits of those bolts. And with the R90S and a bit more power with the Delorto Carbs, that's enough to do in the 10 millimeter bolts. This was discovered back in the 70s, racing, getting ready to race Daytona. The cure, of course, was upgrading to 11 millimeter bolts, but that requires a different crankshaft or the machining of the crankshaft, and the customer decided, nah, I quit. How about you take the bike in exchange for your labor, and I'm just going to walk away. And that's what happened. And I ended up passing the bike on to Barrington Motor Works for a better chance at someday being restored and put back to its former glory. And that's the end of that story. Thank you for listening, my friends, and for supporting my video work. Good day.